Justice Deferred explores the complex interplay between recognition and responsibility in the context of the Palestinian Holocaust. Amir al-Rashid and Zahra Mansour analyze how definitional ambiguity in genocide discourse affects the acknowledgement of Palestinian suffering. This research highlights the challenges in achieving justice and accountability, emphasizing the need for a nuanced understanding of historical narratives. The research explores the definitional ambiguity of genocide in international law, focusing on its implications for Palestinian suffering. It examines how these ambiguities serve as political mechanisms, affecting recognition and responsibility. The study aims to provide a comprehensive understanding of how these debates shape justice discourse and influence institutional and discursive frameworks. Definitional ambiguity in genocide law complicates recognizing Palestinian suffering. The procedural absolution framework examines how institutions and discourse obscure this suffering. Methodologically, we analyze debates as political tools, revealing how they hinder justice. This research highlights the paradox of documented suffering versus its exclusion from formal recognition, challenging dominant narratives in international law. The persistent ambiguity in defining genocide within international law and moral philosophy creates a paradox. The 1948 United Nations Genocide Convention lacks consensus on application, leading to a scholarly divide between critical and positivist approaches. This ambiguity is strategically used to obscure cases like Palestinian suffering, where systematic displacement and violence are documented but excluded from formal recognition. The primary motivation is to address how definitional ambiguity in genocide obscures Palestinian suffering and defers justice. Key objectives include analyzing denial mechanisms, introducing procedural absolution, and examining tensions between critical and positivist approaches. The expected impact is to reframe genocide discourse, highlighting power dynamics, and challenging institutional erasure mechanisms. Miches, 2017, highlights how genocide discourse is shaped by sociolinguistic fields and power dynamics, emphasizing the importance of historical context. This contrasts with Shabas, 2009, who stresses the need for precise legal definitions to maintain genocide's moral significance, advocating for consistent application and rigorous evidentiary standards in international law. Critical approaches risk relativism, potentially undermining legal accountability. Positivist approaches with rigid definitions may exclude evolving genocide patterns. Both can defer engagement with ongoing atrocities. A methodological gap exists in analyzing how these positions enable procedural absolution. The Palestinian case highlights limitations in current genocide studies, revealing institutional biases presupposing political legitimacy of recognized states. The analytical framework of procedural absolution examines how bureaucratic and legal mechanisms transform moral responsibility into technical compliance. This approach analyzes discursive mechanisms that convert ethical imperatives into procedural checklists, enabling institutions to appear responsive while avoiding substantive action. It highlights how definitional debates shift focus from humanitarian response to semantic classification, maintaining the status quo of suffering. Procedural absolution involves bureaucratic and legal mechanisms that shift moral responsibility into technical compliance. It converts ethical imperatives into procedural checklists, enabling institutions to appear responsive without substantive action. This creates an illusion of due process, maintaining the status quo of suffering, as seen in debates over whether the Palestinian case qualifies as genocide. Our methodology involves a discourse analysis of genocide definitions in international law, using the Palestinian context as an illustrative case study. We conduct an institutional analysis of United Nations and legal frameworks, developing the concept of procedural absolution and applying it to the double bind faced by victims. This approach highlights systemic challenges in addressing humanitarian crises. Our research employs critical discourse analysis and legal hermeneutics, utilizing United Nations documents, legal texts, and scholarly debates. We focus on how language evolves from contestation to closure, drawing from critical legal studies and post-colonial theory. The Palestinian context serves as a paradigmatic case, validated through triangulation of diverse methodologies and sources. The analysis centers on the Palestinian context, using it as a primary case study while acknowledging the framework's broader applicability. It engages with the 1948 United Nations Genocide Convention, focusing on United Nations mechanisms, international courts, and academic institutions. The study addresses the tension between critical and positivist approaches in genocide studies, providing a nuanced understanding of definitional politics. The analytical process involves identifying ambiguities in genocide discourse and tracing their institutional deployment. It examines discursive mechanisms of denial and deferral, mapping double binds faced by victims. The procedural absolution framework is developed and applied to the Palestinian case, offering insights into justice deferral. Discursive analysis examines language and classification debates through textual analysis of legal and scholarly documents, mapping progression from contestation to closure. Institutional analysis focuses on United Nations bodies and courts, using process tracing to identify procedural absolution mechanisms. Conceptual analysis develops procedural absolution through theoretical synthesis, creating a framework for justice deferral analysis. Case analysis applies this framework to the Palestinian context, using historical and contemporary evidence. Definitional debates serve as political tools, facilitating systematic erasure. These debates strategically obscure moral questions, transforming them into technical classification issues. This process perpetuates justice deferral, maintaining an illusion of due process while denying substantive justice. In the Palestinian context, this results in a double bind, where claims must meet definitions that inherently question their legitimacy. Definitional ambiguity is strategically used for political purposes, transforming moral issues into technical classification problems. This process defers substantive justice, maintaining an illusion of due process. Palestinian claims face a double bind, needing to prove suffering within definitions that question their legitimacy. Language becomes an instrument of power, perpetuating subjugation through procedural mechanisms. Victims face a double bind, needing to articulate suffering within rigid legal categories. They must provide evidence that meets specific criteria, navigating complex procedures. Institutions demand proof within exclusionary frameworks, shifting focus from genuine suffering to classification debates. This transforms moral responsibility into a mere technical compliance check, perpetuating procedural entanglement without resolution. Procedural absolution mechanisms often involve definitional rigidity and complex procedures. Evidentiary standards demand precise proof, leading to temporal deferral of justice. This deferral can perpetuate injustice, as rigid criteria and procedural complexity overshadow humanitarian needs, focusing on technicalities rather than addressing the core issues. Discursive progression analysis involves acknowledging definitional contestation and engaging in scholarly debate about parameters. This often leads to applying rigid criteria that exclude contemporary cases, focusing on classification over humanitarian response. Such processes achieve conceptual closure, maintaining the status quo and hindering effective action. The Palestinian context reveals systematic displacement since 1948, ongoing blockades, and documented violence. Despite these, formal genocide recognition remains elusive. Debates often center on qualification rather than addressing the humanitarian crisis, illustrating procedural absolution in practice. Institutional frameworks often hinder effective action. United Nations bodies engage in definitional debates, leading to deferral of action, exemplified by endless discussions in the Human Rights Council. International courts face jurisdictional limitations, resulting in limited case acceptance, as seen in International Criminal Court's preliminary examinations without prosecution. Academic institutions encounter methodological debates, causing theoretical impasse, while media outlets' balanced reporting norms create false equivalence. Qualitative insights reveal patterns in institutional responses to genocide claims. More evidence leads to stricter definitional standards. Institutions prioritize process over substance, forcing victims to prove what is predetermined to be excluded. Both critical and positivist approaches enable procedural absolution, while time is weaponized through delays, transforming moral outrage into technical legal discussions. The traditional approach centers on whether a case meets the genocide definition, engaging in definitional debates and accepting institutional frameworks as neutral. In contrast, the proposed framework critiques these as power sites, focusing on justice over classification. It treats language as a power instrument, analyzing political functions and examining deferral mechanisms. The findings advocate for legal reform, emphasizing flexible, context-sensitive approaches in international law. They offer a framework for advocacy strategies to challenge procedural mechanisms that defer justice. Academically, they provide a new lens for genocide and critical legal studies. In public discourse, they equip individuals to identify and challenge denial mechanisms in media and politics. The concept of procedural absolution is introduced to explore how bureaucratic processes transform moral responsibility. An analytical framework reveals how definitional debates act as political tools for systematic erasure. Discursive analysis tracks the shift from acknowledging contestations to reimposing conceptual closure. Methodological synthesis examines the tension between critical approaches and positivist legal certainty. The framework's scope is limited, focusing on the Palestinian case, yet aims for broader application. Methodologically, balancing critical analysis with reform proposals is challenging. Data access relies on public documents, potentially missing internal dynamics. The critical approach risks being seen as undermining legal frameworks. Proposing alternatives without new procedural absolution forms is difficult, and institutional dynamics are ever evolving. Future research should broaden case studies to include contexts with similar definitional exclusions. Developing metrics to measure procedural absolution across institutions is crucial. Investigating the historical evolution of definitional politics in international law and exploring alternative institutional designs can minimize justice deferral. Examining intersections with epistemic injustice and creating pedagogical approaches are essential for comprehensive understanding. Definitional ambiguity in genocide discourse serves as a political tool, not just a semantic issue. Procedural absolution shifts moral responsibility to technical compliance, often excluding victims like in the Palestinian case. Both critical and positivist approaches can inadvertently defer justice, allowing violence to persist through these mechanisms. Key references include Chabas's exploration of genocide in international law, Make's analysis of annihilation politics, and the foundational United Nations Convention on Genocide. Chalk and Jonasson provide historical context, while Moses examines genocide in world history. Shaw, Power, and Weitz offer critical insights into the definitions and implications of genocide across different contexts. Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, please contact al-rashidiwab.iram.edu or zamansuroti.alasnam.edu. Explore our project archive at justicedeferred.uab.iram, Palestinian Holocaust, for more information.